Jeremy, thank you so much for joining me. How are you today?
I'm very good and looking forward to talking to you, Marianne.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, listen, let's start because in my introduction, I explained all of the amazing leadership roles that you've had. Tell us a little bit more about your career. Give us a bit of a run through.
Yes, well, in very short shrift, I started as a consultant with the Boston Consulting Group and then decided to move into marketing. I saw a few cases that I worked on and I was interested by that. So I joined first Jacob Suchard, then I went to L'Oreal to be the marketing director there. Then I joined Coca-Cola and again was marketing for Europe, and then went to Sainsbury's to do marketing. And then I decided actually I'd reached the ceiling of where I wanted to go in marketing, and then joined an AIM-listed startup as a CEO of that. And then actually went back to L'Oreal as the managing director for the UK, and then became the chairman and CEO of the Body Shop Worldwide, which was a business that L'Oreal owned. And then finally, I've been the CEO of Pandora, running a turnaround for them. And now I'm looking for the next exciting CEO role. So that's really exciting for me.
Wow, fantastic, amazing. Some great brands, great global names there. And in that time, Jeremy, have you seen leadership change, or have you noticed anything about the style of leadership that sort of, prevailed in those organizations?
Well, I think what I've really observed is that leadership in organizations, we can argue, has been quite stationary for perhaps 30, even 50 years. Very hierarchical, very much about control, and that had good reason, because actually businesses are about repeating an activity in a very efficient and productive way. And leadership was about driving that efficiency and productivity and driving the lowest cost. What I have observed, and this is everybody's observed it who's living in the world, is that since 2008, which was a seminal moment because it was the launch of the iPhone, we have then seen the phenomenal expansion of those top 5 companies that are the most valuable companies in the world now, which are Amazon and Facebook and Apple and Microsoft and Google. And those companies have pursued a different sort of style of management, which was about speed as one key competitive element. Another one was clearly about data. And another one was about really being connected with the consumer. And what I think we can see now is a number of companies that have gone to the wall. Obviously, the pandemic has accelerated this, and the pandemic has changed in some ways, I think, people's understanding of leadership. But that old method was not and is not sufficient to keep up with the tech disruptors, the globalization, the empowered consumer. And so what we need now is not only many of the leadership skills that have done so well for us because they're fundamental to the art of leadership, but we need to add new skills that will enable leaders now to succeed in this new world order, as we might call it, and be seen to be part of the future and not be left behind.
I love the fact that you focused on one of the areas as being the consumer being the focus. I know that's something that you're very passionate about, and we'll come back to that a bit later. But I want to come back to the point that you make that there's new skills required. Are you able to tell us what those new skills are? Is it easy to identify them, or is it difficult?
It is easy. It's a choice because there are a number, but I've identified 8 that seem particularly important to me. And one of them actually just relates to something that's come out of the pandemic particularly. And I'll just focus on that just to start, which is that the ability to acknowledge that every employee needs to be a leader in their own right. They need to be a leader of themselves. And if they are having people reporting into them, they need to behave like a leader. Now you might say, but isn't that what everybody does? Well, no, actually, because we have a term called manager. And particularly we have a term called middle manager. And those roles have, again, been very much about oversight, about control, about ensuring reproducibility and delivery. And that has been fine. But actually, with the speed of competitive response, the speed with which the consumer both is interested by and gets bored by products, the top leaders of companies need their middle managers and need their employees to embrace change, embrace reactivity, embrace collaboration, embrace working across silos if companies are to succeed. So I call it everyone's a leader now, which is that everybody needs to understand what leadership is, look at themselves as their and question their own leadership skills and embrace that as part of their job. Management is still important, but leadership has to step up in terms of what they do.
Wow. Okay. So everyone's a leader. Wow. That's quite a challenge, isn't it? And is that the biggest challenge facing us now, facing leaders now? Would you say?
No, it's not by any means the number one. I think we can pick on a couple of or four others that are very, very important. You know, the first one, actually, I reached out to many hundreds of employees in some research and asked them what they felt were the most important. And interestingly, the number one, by a long, long way, over 80% of employees felt that they need to see their leaders set and achieve extraordinary goals. I think that was because, and that is one of my 8 leadership skills that are required, that just sitting still is no longer acceptable. And if you are to move forward, you have to imagine. You have to imagine not just an incremental improvement, you have to imagine something probably extraordinary versus what you're doing. And I suspect employees can spot that those companies that are doing incredible things are achieving that, and perhaps their companies aren't being bold enough. So that's one of them. Another two, just to start us off on the conversation, is clearly digital transformation and being digitized is vital. Clearly, many people listening to this could say, well, that's obvious, isn't it? But even now, even with the pandemic and the fact that many people will have realized that to succeed and compete, that's important, I still see many leaders and people within companies handing off responsibility for the digitization on a daily basis of their business to others and not realizing as a leader, it's your personal responsibility to be interested, to be trained, to be learning, to be leading this area. And then another area, just to pick on, is sustainability. Now, again, that may seem very obvious. And within the last months, if not, let's say year, the importance of that has accelerated up the top of the agenda. But most leaders are unclear how to succeed in sustainability, what to do, and more importantly, what to and how to prioritize what they do versus different audiences that they engage with, from investors to employees to consumers. So those are a number that are part of the 8, and leaders now have to embrace incrementally. It's something more that they have to do over and above what they thought they had to do already.
Wow, sounds exhausting. I want to unpack some of these because I think they're really interesting. I want to talk to you about extraordinary goals, first of all, because, you know, we're going through a pandemic at the time of recording. We've had a really tough year. We've probably got another tough year ahead of us. And you're now saying we have to set extraordinary goals. I mean, I personally, I've been thinking, what? Really? Why is it so important to set extraordinary goals, would you say?
Because many companies are either seeing their sales are flat, or they've been dramatically dented, or they're seeing a phenomenal number of young entrepreneurs who want to attack their company. Now, it's in every single sector. So banks, you could say, surely they were very secure. It was very hard to become a bank. The barriers to entry must have been very difficult. And yet the fastest growing banks, the ones that are most exciting, are these new disruptors like Monzo and Revolut, etc., and Starling. Now, they're going to eat the lunch of the big guys. Now, they may not become as big, but what they're going to take is all the growth, all the new consumers, all the incremental opportunities. So if big banks, if big retailers, if big everything you can think of want to grow, because that still remains our capitalist mandate, then incremental will get them so far. But most businesses now need to embrace the concept of transformation. And the only way to consider and embrace transformation is to be able to set a goal that is significantly different than what people are doing already. And that's why they have to do it. If they don't, they can carry on. But what they probably will find is in a number of years, a short number of years or long, they may not exist anymore, or at least may not be as valuable as they would like to be.
Wow. And the second one you mentioned was digitisation. I'm thinking there's probably quite a good link between the two, that if you are able to digitise, the digitisation will help you to achieve the extraordinary goals, or will support that. Is that the case?
Totally. I mean, an extraordinary goal can be a range of things. It can go from saying you want your brands to be the talked about brands, not the ones that people are indifferent about. It can be about growth. It can be about sustainability or digitization. There are a number of areas that would be appropriate for a leader to realize is important for them. But without a doubt, digitization, as I'm using that word, but let's call that e-commerce, let's call that data, let's call that AI, all of these areas are the way that brilliant companies are going to get one up on the average company. And the reason is for two things. Either you've got to be able to connect with consumers directly and sell to them directly through e-commerce, or you've got to know your consumer in more granularity, better than your competition, so that you can engage them and they choose you over somebody else. And those people that are into data, into the granularity, will beat those that aren't. So this is why also, for every company who thinks, yeah, but I've done it, I've got the website, we're up and running, that's just the beginning. And that's the mistake. Many people think digital transformation is going from zero to up and running. Actually, that's the beginning. The real hard work is to go from up and running to being brilliant, because it's a continual battle every single day to beat or to engage consumers, to keep them with you, and to hold back the competition who are trying to do exactly the same against you.
Absolutely. The third one you mentioned, which I think is going to be a big one, even bigger as we come out of the pandemic, is the sustainability piece. Yeah. How I do feel that a lot of leaders, a lot of organisations are not excited enough about sustainability, not doing enough. How do we get them to really engage with it and really save tomorrow's planet, as you say?
Well, to be honest, I think most leaders in public companies realize that they have to be engaged because they're investors and the markets are demanding it. Actually, private companies, I noticed some of them are saying, well, this isn't that a bother for me, and while others are very interested. The problem is that at first glance, the actions that are going to save the planet may well increase costs. Now, that is absolutely not a fact that's locked in stone, because reducing your energy bills in all forms will save you money. So that's a slam dunk obvious thing to do. But where we've got to in most industries is the lowest cost production. And the lowest cost production, on the whole, requires one to use plastic or to create waste that can't be recycled, or actually not to even care where the waste goes, because 99% of companies aren't accountable for their waste. So there are two ways it goes. It's basically through push as opposed to pull. And the push will be either the investors are now demanding responses and are disinvesting or investing in those people that are responsive, or something which I never really believed would occur in great form, which is government regulation. I thought the governments were too weak and scared to regulate, to force change. But I've noticed in the last few months even, we've had Boris Johnson in the UK now make a law that in 2030 all cars have got to be electric. And just yesterday, the French government have banned short-haul flights. Now, these are dramatic, huge stakes in the ground, which are not so far out that actually we'll never have to worry about them because somebody else's problem. These are close in. My sense is that with the costs of the pandemic that most governments are suffering, they're going to look for ways to recoup that cost. And one way is to start charging companies by regulating them to pay for their waste, for example. And this is going to dramatically accelerate the actions that companies have to take to mitigate those costs or to show that they care, or not just show, but act in a way.
That's encouraging. And I'm actually shocked. Did you say that 99% of companies do not take responsibility for their waste? Is that what you said?
Yes, I don't actually have the formal number, but essentially, if you think about every piece of waste that you create, the person who is responsible for that is the local council and government who picks it up and finds a landfill or some other thing. Companies are not having to pay for that truck that comes and picks up the waste. Now, of course, there are industrial waste that they do have to pay for. So if you're in a factory and you're creating chemical waste. Some of the car companies, in terms of recycling, they have to. But let's say if we think of consumer domestic waste, it's our council tax by country and the local council that has to pay for all of that. So yes, they can wipe their hands of what actually happens to their product once it's sold.
It's interesting. I hadn't thought about it in that way, and I am hopeful that, as you know, having gone through and still going through this pandemic, where we've seen very little activity in the skies, we've seen very little traffic. Certainly the stars at night, we can see them. The skies, but the air is purer. I do hope that encourages us to do more to save the planet.
We will have to see. I think what I can see, just for if we're to divert to this, is there's a big gap between what we all as people and consumers would like to do and what we do. Because the one thing that drives us is convenience and affordability. And many of the things that we will have to do to save the planet will probably cost a bit more or be less convenient. So let me give you an example. Obviously, when the governments ban the use of plastic bags in supermarkets, we've all accepted it. But is it as convenient? No. Has it cost us as much? Well, no, it hasn't, but it has definitely been less convenient. But it's only because the regulation is there that we've all had to adapt our behavior. I suspect with a number of elements, we will have to be regulated. Now, a contrary example of this is Tesla. And I think Tesla is a great example that when something's innovated, which is truly beautiful and superior to what exists, and therefore it's possible, if it's as affordable, and obviously Teslas are still very expensive, actually we will embrace it because this will be better. So there will be many examples where the solutions will be better than what we have, and we'll embrace it openly. But there are others which will be less convenient or more expensive. And in those instances, we will need to be nudged or forced or pushed, because we're not going to do it voluntarily, I don't believe, not in a large scale.
That's interesting. I think you're right. It is about convenience and affordability. You're absolutely right. So what is the role of the consumer when it comes to making changes in the future, would you say? You talked about consumers earlier.
From a leadership point of view, actually, I'm going to come back to leadership because every company will probably say, well, we've got to have the consumer in the heart of what we think, or would like to believe that they should. But what happens with all of us in our jobs is we get subsumed by the day job, by looking internally, by the meetings, by the challenges, by just getting stuff done. And as a result of that, we start to not bother to look at what does the consumer actually want. We may even think that what we're doing is so good, we don't even have to bother asking the consumer, because surely we wouldn't be doing it if it wasn't brilliant. But I think Jeff Bezos is a man to listen to, not only because he's the richest man in the world, so there must be something he's doing right, but also because he writes an interesting letter personally to all his shareholders every year about his personal observations. And in 17, 18, he wrote a note just saying that the one thing he loves about consumers is they have an insatiable desire for new. But what he's observing is they're also getting bored by new quicker than ever before. And therefore, the speed with which one has to invent, to excite, the speed with which one has to remain competitive is increasing. And you've heard me now mention speed several times because it's really a source of competitive advantage. And therefore, if you're not listening to your consumer, whatever you thought they were thinking just a year ago is probably out of date. And that's not what the majority are thinking, because they're moving fast in what they want, in what they like. And for the first time since 2008 with the iPhone, they are empowered to decide. They're not following other consumers blindly as what happened before, because the television was basically monopolizing thought. They are now very, very self-empowered. And as a result of that, you better stay close to them, because if you don't, they'll surprise you by going somewhere else.
That's really insightful. Thank you for that. I like that. And the fact that we're getting bored with new much faster. I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right. You're describing me. That's really interesting. Jeremy, how has working from home changed leadership?
I think what we can read, and I think it's about reading and listening to what leaders and people are saying, is that, and it comes back to actually my line, everyone's a leader now, that leaders have realized that they can empower and let's use the word trust their employees to be more responsible, more self-sufficient, more accountable than they believed before. I think, and therefore we're seeing this. So that is a fact. That is the feedback that's coming back from CEOs, that they have seen that their command and control approach is not sufficient. And in this fast moving, incredibly complex world, they need to trust and rely on the intelligence, on the contribution, on the diversity, on the creativity of employees far more than they did before. So I think that's one very big thing. Another little thing is actually a Zoom screen democratizes employees in a nice way. So if you're in a meeting or if you're in an office, you know, the hierarchy of the meeting, the hierarchy of the office means that important voices that should be heard from employees are not heard. And yet when everyone's equal with an equal square on a screen and is open to communicating, every voice has the chance to be heard and has an equal say, as you might say. And I think we've seen or might have seen in progressive companies that the powerful voices of diverse people are being listened to and are contributing. And I'm sure there's been a recognition that great ideas and contributions can come from many quarters of a company.
That's wonderful. So listen, your knowledge about leadership is so broad. It's wonderful. It's really excellent. What are you helping clients with when they're inviting you in to speak or to work with them? What are the areas that you're focusing on?
Well, obviously I have these 8 key areas that I think are important, but during the scoping process, I seek to find out what's actually the most important thing for the client for a particular event, because obviously it's about really talking about only 1 or 2 subjects in the 30 minutes that one has. So it's about zooming in to say, what is the event's purpose? What is the objective that the client has for their particular audience? And therefore being able to bring a storytelling there. One of the most important areas that I help audiences with is to understand and acknowledge and to bring to the fore that most companies, most leaders have what I call self-limiting beliefs. They either know this or subconsciously they could accept it. It's anything that stops them being able to do what needs to be done, from an extraordinary goal, from stepping forward in sustainability, from creating the most incredible digitization, from finding out how to connect with the consumer. And actually, these can, at one extreme, be about fear about what will happen if something goes wrong, fear about doing something the organization has in a sort of coordinated way, not made it possible or allowable to talk about. And what I can give as sort of magic dust to an audience is acknowledging that that's there, and then realizing that we can have just 3 things which can change that. The first one is about confidence, to actually be brave and to embrace things. The next one is around courage, to be able to go forward and overcome fear. And the first one is just acknowledging that it actually is a barrier to companies and employees collaborating. And without acknowledging that it exists, you're not going to be able to confront it and overcome it. So those 3 things, I find audiences walk away inspired and energized and having a sense that straight away, literally after the session, they can be better leaders straight away by embracing the things I speak about, but particularly around this confidence and courage.
That's really powerful. Jeremy, listen, I could talk to you all day, but to finish, can people get a list of your 8 skills from anywhere?
Yes, if they go onto my website, which is jeremy-schwartz.com, I've actually laid out these 8 subjects and put content and put videos for each one so that they can really understand a bit more about what's behind them. And then, of course, if they contact me, we can have a discussion and really go into detail, because within each 8, there are multiple elements that can be adapted to each client as they require.
I can imagine. That's brilliant. That's really generous of you to share that. Thank you for your time, Jeremy. I've really enjoyed it.
Good. Well, thank you, Maria. I really enjoyed it too.